Hello everybody, this is Danny from Deep South Homestead on our Gardening 101. I was going to start putting up videos, guys. It's just been such a hectic week and everything's just coming together on me, but we're going to get this thing done. I want to talk about I guess the first things we have to understand is there is stages to gardening. You don't just go out and throw seeds in the ground and hope for the best if you want a successful garden. Site prep, to me, is one of the most important things, and that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about site preparation. Now, as we talked about before, you can put all the fertilizer in the ground you want, but if the pH is not right, it's virtually useless to you. The plant will not take up the nutrition that it needs when it needs it. So let's talk a little bit about how do we get ready for this. Okay, the first thing we want to do is actually in the fall, around September, you want to go out and you want to take a pH reading of your soil. And when you do, you want to make sure the pH on your soil is around 6.5 to 6.8 for most vegetables. Now, it varies for different vegetables, but that's an average for most of them. If you can get the soil to that point, with the exception of a few things like potatoes. Now, I'm not talking about sweet potatoes, because sweet potatoes is not classified as a potato. It's a tuber. We're talking about like your white potatoes and your red potatoes, or some people here in the South would call them Irish potatoes. They need just a 5 to 5.5 pH, but normally everything else, other than, we're talking about garden vegetables now, needs a 6.5 to a 6.8 pH. And you can actually buy the little meters that you use to stick in the soil. I have one here that I've used, and like I said in the other video, I've been using it for many years. It really doesn't have a name on it. It just says pH Analyzer. I bought it from a seed company years ago. The proper way to use this particular one, and yours may be different, is to get you some soil from your garden. You want to take it in 2 or 3 different places. I usually take a tablespoon, and I'll go around in my garden and go down about 2 inches deep to 3 inches deep, and I'll take soil readings from, put maybe 10 to 15 tablespoons in a plastic cup, and I'll bring it up to the house, and I'll put just enough water in it to make it damp. Now, you don't want to overdo it with water. Now, we don't want to be using community water with chlorine and all that in it. You want to use good, just plain. We use well water here because our well water is like neutral. It's not it doesn't have anything in it. It's just neutral. But you want to be able to use a good, clean water source. Now, put that in there so it doesn't tamper with the pH, and take your pH reading. If it's on the acidic side, less than 6.5, then you want to add some lime in the soil. Now, if you're planning on planting a fall crop, then what you want to do is you're going to need that lime to work immediately. Now, you can buy what's called a hot lime or a hydrated lime. You can use that, and it works immediately. But you have to be so careful with it because it's called hot lime. It will actually burn a plant up, to be honest with you. You can actually go to your county extension office and you can get a soil analysis ran. Now, that's probably one of the better things to do because it tells you how much phosphorus, how much nitrogen and all the stuff that you need, and potassium and all that you need in your soil, and at what rates you need it for a standard garden vegetable. That's what I highly recommend doing. Well, we do our soil that way once every 3-4 years maybe. I'll test it to see what it's missing. Now, I do a lot of my own testing. You can go buy the kits and you can test your own soil. But if you have the county extension services in your area, then it's just a few bucks. I think it used to be $5 here, maybe 8 or 12 now. I don't know because I haven't had it done in several years. I just do my own. But it tells you what's lacking in your soil. Now once you know what's lacking in your soil, let's talk about the lime again. Lime, Dolomite lime, takes about 3 months for it to actually begin sweetening the soil up where your plants can actually begin to break their stuff down and use it. And that's one of the main problems that most people make early on is that when they, let's say for instance you plant a tomato plant. When they put their tomato plant in the ground, they say, oh, I want to stop blossoming right, I need lime. And they'll put Dolomite lime in the ground. Well, it really doesn't do you any good for 3 months. I mean, it begins working some, but it really doesn't kick in good for 3 months. Now, if you're going to do something like that, you need to purchase either some hydrated lime, or you can use, and you be very careful with the hydrated lime because you just burn your plant up. But I recommend basic slag. That's what we use here. Now, basic slag will only last for that year, and it's gone. But it works instantly. Now, lime will last for 3 years on average, but it takes 3 months before it starts working like it's supposed to. So once we know that we need our pH so where we need it at, if your pH is too alkaline, say it's 7.1 to 7.3 or something like that, then what you need to do is you need to mix in some sulfur into your soil. Now you can buy sulfur and you can put it in at the rate in which it says to apply it in order to bring your pH back down to 6.5 to 6.8. Now 7's not going to hurt anything, but it is a little neutral, but it's okay. Now, once we have our pH analyzed, then we need to know how much nitrogen is lacking in our soil. Now, nitrogen can be got in your soil many different ways. Here at Deep South Homestead, you'll hear us say a lot of times that the fall is the busiest time of the year for us. There's a lot of truth to that. A lot of people say, well, can you come to the conference, or can you do this, or can you do that in the fall? And we always say no, because we're just too busy. Because our next gardening season actually begins in late September and early October. That's when we start getting the soil ready for January, February, and March. Because we want everything to have time to break down and start working. Now what we usually will do, we will dump rabbit manure, chicken manure, compost, all these kind of things, leaf mold. All this stuff will be dumped into our garden, grass clippings and all this kind of stuff during the winter months. We just pile it on the soil, and as we put it on, as soon as we put it on, we turn it under. Because what happens is if you put any of your manures on top of the ground and you leave them laying out and the sun hits them, the sun will leach most of the nitrogen out of it. And then very little nutrition is left in it, because animal manure has such an inconsistent amount of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium and all that in it. It's just not consistent. That's why organic gardening is so difficult to do and do it well, is because most of your organic fertilizers are very inconsistent with analyses. Now, to combat that, what we do is we begin, as I told you, turning all this stuff into the soil. We will clean our chicken pens out in the fall. And it's usually a 2 or 3 day ordeal to clean out our chicken pens and our turkey pens and our cow stalls, our goat stalls. When we clean out all these things, we can have anywhere between 15 and 20 of the big giant bucket loads of stuff out of the barn on our tractor to dump back into our garden. And then as soon as we do it, we turn it in. And when we turn that in, now I say turning in, I don't use a moldboard plow. I have a pan plow. Now my pan plow will actually turn the dirt down 16 inches deep, which in some places that's too deep, because if you turn up too much clay, what happens is your topsoil begins to get hard and crumbly, and it's not a good thing. But you do want to be able to break the pan. Now, if you have access to a subsoiler, that's really what you want to do, is subsoil it first and then come in and break it. And this pan plow I'm talking about has 24-inch round discs on it, has 2 of them. And what they do when you go through the garden, you've seen some of my videos in the past, it picks that dirt up and completely flips it over and exposes the dirt that's deep in the ground up to the surface. And what that does is all the manures and the green grass clippings and the leaf mold and all that stuff we put on top of the ground, it literally turns it under about 8 inches deep and just flips it. And anything that's left on top of the garden, any kind of residue from the gardening before, corn stalks, anything like that, it turns it under as compost and organic matter. Now, we don't really flip our soil, but maybe once every 3 years. We don't do it every year, because after the 3rd year, you'll be able to tell when you need to do it again. The soil, you can tell by the soil. Now, from that point on, if we mix any more amendments, which we usually do all through the fall, we'll gather up leaves out under trees and we'll run them over our lawnmower and we'll just shred that stuff up into small pieces, and we'll take them and put them on our garden as organic matter. And from that point on, we just take a disc and we disc it into the soil. We'll stop doing this probably around the end of November, and then we just let the garden just sit until probably mid-January. And when we get to mid-January, our first thing we're going to be planting is going to be English peas, so we get them in mid-January, or maybe the 1st of February, depends on the weather. And at that point, we'll begin to start breaking our garden up to use again. We'll go in and really subsoil it down deep to make sure. Now, there's several ways you can break the soil up. There's a lot of no-till ways that we use. Once our garden is going in the spring, we use a no-till way. We stick down the fork deep in the ground and we just prise it over. And what that does is that aerates the soil. Now, one of the key to site preps is aeration in the soil. The soil needs to breathe down deep. You need your microbes to be working. That's why once we get our garden done, our soil prep done at the end of November, we don't really fool with it anymore until springtime, because we want to give those microbes time to begin to work and to function underground, because that's what actually breaks down your phosphoruses and your nitrogens and all this kind of stuff to the point where the plant can start to absorb it. If you've got your lime right, if you've got all your NPKs right, if you've got all this stuff right, then basically all you have to do when it comes spring like us is just plant. You don't really have to do a lot of fertilization. Now, we will use some inoculants and stuff like that on some of our pea seeds and stuff. But other than that, most of the time, our early season crops, we don't use a lot of fertilizer on. Now, we will, if we're planting cornfields or something like that, we will use commercial fertilizer on cornfields, because we just don't have enough animal manure to actually put in the bigger fields, because we mainly focus on our vegetable garden with our animal manures and our leaf molds and this type of nature, our composters and stuff like that, where we're growing our beans and peas and tomatoes and green beans and stuff like that. That's when peppers and things, that's where we mainly focus our organic gardening at. And there are occasions there where we'll have to go to town and buy maybe some blood meal for some nitrogen, or some bone meal for some phosphorus or something like that. If we see one of our plants is turning purple a little bit when it's not supposed to, we know we've got a phosphorus deficiency. So we'll go in and we'll put that stuff and amend the soil once our plants get going. But guys, site prep is everything when it comes to gardening, and it must begin in the fall, so that your plants, or your garden and your soil has time to, let's just say your soil, not your garden, but your garden soil has time to break down. It has time to compost. It has time to mulch its own self. It has time for all the microbes to start working in it. This is where you want to be at is amending in the fall for the spring. Don't wait till spring gets there and go out and try to amend your soil and try to get all the things in it that it needs, because if you do that, you're probably not going to have a very good garden. And I know lots of people look at it and go, man, I don't know how you have so much stuff, in such a small area. Because I'll be honest with you, the amount of food you see us raise here at Deep South Homestead, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, we have 5 gardens. The one that produces most of our food is the small one, and it's 64 feet long and about 40 feet wide. And out of that one garden, we will produce most of what we eat as far as fresh vegetables is concerned. Now, we do have a Back to Eden garden, which we will amend in the fall also. As soon as everything comes out of it here in a few weeks, we'll go in and we'll start taking our wood chips and we'll just start piling them on the ground like 6 to 8 inches deep, and we'll let that set all winter like that. And then in the spring, we'll take our soil analysis to make sure that our pH is right, and then we'll put our wood chips on. And then in the spring, we'll go in and we'll rake the wood chips back and we'll actually plant in them. We don't usually do too much amending to that soil, because usually the rotten woods and the stuff, we may have to add a little blood meal, because the wood does require a lot of nitrogen to break it down. But we may add some blood meal in there when we're planting things. But other than that, we usually let the Back to Eden just do its own thing, because that's what it's supposed to do. Now we have that garden, which is about 12 feet wide and about, 1, 2, 3, 16, 30, is about 48 feet long. It's kind of a small Back to Eden garden, but there is where we put a lot of our tomatoes. It's where we put our rattlesnake beans on trellises and stuff like that. And it seems to work out real good. Now we do hugel culture. Now one of the things about hugel culture is we get it ready in the fall also. We'll go in, we'll clean the top of the bed off, and we will try to get some kind of a cover crop growing on it, so that all winter long we don't have to worry about erosion or anything like that. And then in the spring, we'll actually take and cut that cover crop down and just leave it laying on top of the ground as mulch on the hugel bed. Now, our other fields back here are predominantly corn. They're predominantly, we call them Irish potatoes, or white and red potatoes, and sweet potatoes. Those are things that require large areas to grow and grow large amounts of, those are staples for us. We have one field that has nothing but sugar cane in it. So we have these areas, and we do all of this in the fall. Once all the crops come out, we go in, we begin to plant overwinter cover crops of some types of clovers or something like this that will make it through the winter, and they also double as a food plot during the winter months to hunt over. So once hunting season's over with in the spring, we go in and we take the bush hog and we mow it all down and put that green cover on top of the ground and come right in behind it with that big pan plow I was telling you about. We turn all that green manure underneath and we let it rot for a few weeks, and then we go in with our disc and disc it, and we plant our corn and we'll plant our potatoes and different things like that in there. So guys, just remember, site prep begins in the fall. Do your homework in the fall, and if you do it right and you amend the soil right and get the pH right, come spring, you will have one of the most fantastic gardens you've ever had. Now, we do grow fall stuff, don't get me wrong, we do grow fall things, but we grow fall things because once we amend our soil and once we lime our soil, the pH is usually good for 3 years, so we don't have to lime every year. And what we'll do is the year after we lime, like this year, we'll come in, we'll plant a fall crop, because we've got 2 years we can plant a fall crop now in that garden because we limed it last fall. And now all we got to do is go in and put the organic matter in and the manure and stuff in, give it a few weeks to compost down, and we can go in and put our fall stuff in, our cabbages, our broccolis, and our onions, things like that, you know, that can overwinter well here in the Deep South. We go ahead and get those things in so that we'll have fresh stuff to eat. Our turnip greens, our rutabagas, and things like that, that seems to be able to handle the cold all right. Carrots, these sort of things. We try to get all that stuff in the fall. Now we have a schedule here that we plant by. We plant our strawberries in November. We plant our onions at the 1st of November. We plant our garlic in mid-October here. There's just an array of different times that we plant different things. Our lettuces go in mid-October. Trying to think of some of the other things here. Our cabbages go in mid-October. Our broccolis go in mid-October, stuff like that, so that we're able to, to grow our winter brassicas is how they would word it. And they seem to do extremely well. Now, every now and then we'll get what's called an Indian summer. And when that happens, I mean, we have no control over it. When that happens, a lot of times the broccoli will bolt. And we actually don't get very much broccoli off of it. We basically could just eat the leaves. But things like collards, they do really well in the wintertime here. These are things that you need to keep in mind that are good wintertime crops in the Deep South. But they all do good if the soil has been amended properly. And guys, that's what it's all about, is proper amending the soil. Do it in the fall. Don't wait till the spring. You want your plants to be able to get as much from the soil as they can get. So I hope this has been a little educational for y'all on Gardening 101. Site prep is rule number 1. Get that done first. And the rest of the garden will take care of itself. And we're going to talk about different vegetables in the next series. Maybe squash, tomatoes, peppers, your nightshade crops. However I decide to work that out. We'll be starting to do that, and we'll be showing you what we do and how we do it and talking about it. So I hope y'all have enjoyed this, and thank you from Deep South Homestead.